which will explore how alternative infrastructure for communications is developing within our movements. And we will also discuss collective action to build the internet that we need and want. And many of us, I guess, believe that another internet is possible. So this session will look at that and concrete ways of moving towards that dream. Let me just briefly mention that the APC has been part of the International Coordination Committee of the World Social Forum, and we are also a member of the World Free Media Forum. So we are really happy to see this discussion happening today here in the framework of the forum. In relation to the session, our discussants, our speakers, invited speakers will be looking at what is possible when our connections prioritize our safety, consent, and also political resistance, and what could be built together by developing alternatives to corporate and government control of the internet. And in order to address those questions, we have bring together a diverse group of speakers and activists from different regions who will share their views and perspectives on these issues. So we will begin our discussion with some reflections on the development of autonomous community owned and operated infrastructure, and we will hear from activist technologies about their experiences. But we also expect that our discussion will explore some specific priorities among our movements and visions for the future internet that we want and we need. So let me just start with, I mean, apart from welcoming all our speakers, let me start with Alfredo Lopez from May 1st, Movement Technology. Alfredo, it would be amazing if you can share with us why do we need alternative internet infrastructure? So Alfredo, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the heroism of getting this thing started. These things are never easy to do. There are some glitches and difficulties, so we appreciate everyone being here, and really do appreciate the organizers and my buddies at the Association for Progressive Communications for putting the panel together. The answer to the question why we need an alternative structure is the same uh, answer to the question why we need an internet and why it exists. And what I always say is I urge people when we look at the internet to not uh, think about the wires and computers that I'm setting my timer. By the way, that's why I'm. There we go. Um, Yay. Okay. Um, the question of why we need an internet has to do with who the internet actually is. And at May 1st, uh, we are a membership democratic organization of a huge number of people in the United States and Mexico working around the internet, not only sharing the resources of the internet, but doing all kinds of network stuff and campaigns and like, being members of APC, among other things, being at conferences like this one. Um, and our perspective is that the internet is the people. Um, if you don't have the people, it's just a bunch of machines and wires. It's nothing. Doesn't exist. Has no importance historically, socially, or any other way. Um, but when you add the approximately 4.5 billion people who are using the internet network to communicate right now, you see the enormous power that it represents. It is among the most powerful human enterprises in human history, certainly the most powerful communications vehicle. So the question is why people are doing this. The human race has always sought to communicate when it's facing periods of crisis. And there is no question that the human race is facing enormous crisis right now. And so, what we do with the internet is we reach out to other people, try to figure out what our lives are like. try to express the reality of our own lives. Uh, we try to get their opinions. Uh, we seek their support. And that in and of itself is a hugely powerful uh, uh, role that the internet plays. It allows us to share who we are with potentially 4.5 billion people. And that sharing has always been key to human development and human survival. It also lets us plan for that survival. How do we organize? How do we do all that other stuff that you know? How do we have conferences like this? Um, and that is a really, really critical role. The fact is, the internet today is absolutely central to the communications of all civil society and all movements for social change. And I'm old enough at the age of 72, I've been in this movement 54 years. There was a time when then you did that by paper and telephone, and it was a very, very different reality, and much less powerful and much less competent than it is today. The internet has changed our options. And I frequently talk about in the United States, the whole question of Black Lives Matter. um, you know, the popularity of that slogan and the power that's generated by that popularization of that slogan wouldn't have been possible without the internet. It was born on the internet. Alicia Garza first wrote it on the internet. So that's certainly, one of the major functions that we have, that function of coordination and planning. It allows us to exchange information. You use you wiki everything. Wikipedia is one of your, I know it is. And perhaps I'm being presumptuous, so you can uh, write in the chat that I'm being presumptuous if I am. But I would bet everyone uses Wikipedia. There was no Wikipedia. And think about 20 years ago when there wasn't a Wikipedia, the difference in your understanding, the difference in your access to information, the difference in your knowledge, the difference in your life. That's what the internet brings. And finally, and most importantly, it brings something that's so valuable to us, the ability to collectively imagine, which we're doing right now. We're talking about what the future can bring, what the future can be for us. And that is absolutely essential to our survival. We are probably the only animal on Earth, the only species on Earth that actually can visualize and imagine a future, that can construct a future. And that construction and that future, that process is greatly enhanced by the internet. Now, take a second and think this: the people who control the internet are a bunch of corporations. And whatever you think of corporations, they don't give any importance to anything I just said. Their perspective is use the internet for marketing. And in the case of the governments, use it for surveillance and information gathering. That's not what the internet is supposed to do. That's not why we're on the internet and why we built the internet. And so, um, in this battle over the internet, we have to have an alternative as it goes to moving more toward marketing, but also when they try to close it down, when they try to control and repress it. If we are going to realize the functions that the internet has, for which we invented it, we have to look for alternatives that we control, allowing us to use it to oppose perspectives, but from corporations, and oppose activities and whatever from corporations and government, and also to make plans as a human race that are not being made by corporations and governments. We need independent thinking. And to do the independent thinking as a collective whole, as a human race worldwide, we need to have an independent internet form of communications. I shall stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfredo, for that very powerful opening. Yes, we are the internet, so we build the internet. And with that call, I would like to then go next to Dinesh from Janatsu. Jeanette, Alfredo has said, no, we are the internet, we build the internet. And one way of doing that definitely are community networks. So, what are community networks and what impact do they have in the way people occupy digital spaces? Please, Dinesh, share your view with
Thank you,
us.
Valerie. Um, and Alfredo already set the context really nicely for me. So, if you're not careful, what community networks can be degenerative easily, right? So earlier it used to be uh, the catchphrase would be "revolution shall be published." When the printing press came, the revolution shall be broadcasted. When the radios came, and certainly most of us will remember, revolution shall be televised, and now the revolution shall be streamed. But all these are majorly controlled by corporate entities, and it was never possible to go in that direction, right? And like Alfredo said, is the revolution going to be marketed now, right? Or the governments want surveillance, right? But what do we want, right? The revolution going to be acknowledged. There are various ways of not acknowledging. If you know farmer struggles in India going on now, but basically coming to what a community network should be, that's a that's in a huge flux now, right? It's not like the earlier times when we set up a community network, and it's where there is no network and the community can use it, and therefore it's a community network. And there are nice examples of how the community can compete with the corporate world, and therefore it's community network. But like Alfred also said, the people are the most important parts of the community network, and that's where I want to also emphasize, right? So if a community network is about infrastructure, resources, and all that, is the community really involved in maintaining it? Does it look at an entrepreneurial opportunity, a skill learning opportunity, and understanding the building blocks of it? Do they know what resource sharing means? Do they think of it as a commons of sorts, right? The new commons. And can they set up a code of conduct for their own community network needs, right? The degenerative aspect can be very easy, right? You set up a hotspot, and is that a community network, right? Your family is on it, your friends are on it, maybe it's on the intersection of a road. Is that a community network, right? So we need to be very careful in calling out the community of the community network. So what do I mean by that, right? So can we, instead of saying, just think about it, can we, instead of saying a community network, can we identify the community, right, for its needs, right? Is it for general information exchange? Anybody in a community can call each other, okay, or message each other, or what if there are special needs, right? During the lockdown, people wanted to do work from home. So is a community network um, provision that kind of a care where people are allowed, happily working from home? In all these things, I we can go on in this direction, but where we need to come down to is also to identify how in the name of community networks, we can easily uh, get into the class orthodox or classical traditional patterns of discrimination against women, discrimination against special people, discrimination against very important in this next 5 billion people. Although Alfredo said there are 4.5 billion on the internet, I mean, it's very important to see how the network is available for 2.5 of the 4.5 billion people. Right? What are they doing on it? Are they forwarding WhatsApp messages? Are they writing WhatsApp messages? Are they broadcasting WhatsApp? I mean, just even to stick to WhatsApp, right? So are they, what are they doing, right? In India, we went through, like everybody, everywhere else, online classes. So how does community network define itself for students who don't have phones, who don't have network, to get and do like webinars like what we are doing, or learn from their teachers remotely? Now I'm very specific. I'm able to say this is a community network that supports online classes, and suddenly I have to break many things, right? I have to investigate, the community has to investigate how access is possible on the network for a young child. What does safety mean for a young child or a teenager or a girl? Right now we are going into, as soon as we identify and say this is a student community network or online classes community network, we will be nicely engaging into the needs of that community. Otherwise, we will just brush most of everything that's need to be looked at in detail under the rug, right? So I would say, like, let's start identifying what is this community of interest when we say community network, right? And once you do that, then you can say how much of it can be decentralized, how much of it can be very special resource streaming needs, connections, and how does the community identify their own needs and have a say in this, even if it's an online classes, right? How does the community have a say in this, right? Two, if I come to the next point where I say community network, it's very important to have a community network that is inclusive of low literate people, of older people, of younger people. Then we have to pull our hairs out to see what does that mean. What is content access? Can the community network support a storytelling format, a local language storytelling format that none of us would understand? It could be a group of 100 people. How does the community network support? So now we are pushing the community network idea into services, tools, and looking at a specific context of community needs, right? I think this is very important, and that's where I want to kind of end with and say community network can be easily set up with corporate or government setup, or telephone based and whatever. And who's governing is that, who are the authorities that govern these things, right? Who are the people who are curating it? Is community owning anything, community operating, or community commissioning things, right? If the discussion, if the discrimination continues, right, then how does the community network help in transforming them and getting out of the imposed constructs over the time, right? I mean, I think we have to get into that when we say community network, especially in the context of safety, right? And and uh, um, alternative infrastructures, right? So anyway, I want to stop there. Mm,
Thank you so much, Dinesh. Yes,
yeah.
definitely community networks are part of the new commons, but how not to reproduce structures of oppression and discrimination, that's one of the questions that remains. And definitely community networks are going through that and finding some ways to do so. So that brings me to then our next speaker, Marilyn Crisostomo from National Coordination of Articulation of Black Rural and Quilombola Communities. Marilyn, why is community media important for our movements, particularly in terms of political resistance? So please, the floor is with you. You can share your views with us. You are muted. I see you are muted, Marie-Hélène. I still see you muted. Marie-Hélène, can you hear us? Marie-Hélène, tal vez nos escuchas. Ahora ahora te veo sin mutear.
Hola.
Muy bien.
Hola.
¿Necesitas que yo repita la pregunta o is it okay?
Oi, consegue me ouvir? Consigo ouvir. Sim. Certo. Vou me apresentar.
Adelante, por favor.
Sim.
Obrigada.
De nada. Obrigada, bom dia. Meu nome é Marie-Hélène Crisóstomo, sou quilombola do território Baião, no sudeste do Tocantins, fica no Brasil. Sou jornalista, graduada pela Universidade Federal do Tocantins e membro do coletivo de comunicação da Coordenação Nacional de Articulação das Comunidades Negras Rurais Quilombolas, a CONAC, e da Coordenação Estadual de Comunidades Quilombolas do Estado do Tocantins, a COECTO. Por meio da CONAC, fui apresentada ao Intervozes, Coletivo Brasil de Comunicação, e a seu convite, na pessoa de Mônica Mourão, aqui estou. Receba, Mônica, e ao Intervozes, meus cumprimentos e agradecimentos em nome da CONAC e da COECTO. A minha participação neste espaço será a partir da minha experiência como jornalista junto ao movimento quilombola do Brasil. Embora a população quilombola brasileira nunca tenha sido recenseada como tal, os dados do pré-censo que estava previsto para ser realizado em 2020 e pela primeira vez a população quilombola será recenseada demograficamente, foi possível identificar a existência de 5.972 quilombos presentes em 24 estados federados do Brasil e distribuídos em 1.674 municípios. A CONAC estima, portanto, que existem 6.333 quilombos e 16 milhões de quilombolas no Brasil. Nossos quilombos estão presentes em todos os biomas brasileiros. Dada essa diversidade e as falhas na distribuição da cobertura da internet no Brasil, temos enfrentado muitos desafios para assegurar o direito de acesso à comunicação e informação via internet, pois a maioria dos nossos territórios estão localizados em áreas rurais, onde a cobertura da internet não chega. No Brasil, a distribuição da internet é feita por meio de concessão, feita pela Agência Nacional de Telecomunicações, a Anatel, que é disponibilizada a operadoras de internet. Entretanto, essas operadoras apenas disponibilizam serviços em áreas urbanas. Para assegurar a cobertura na maioria dos nossos territórios, o preço que essas operadoras pedem pela instalação e a mensalidade são inacessíveis ao nosso povo. Temos enfrentado muita dificuldade para estabelecer e manter canais de comunicação com a maioria dos nossos territórios quilombolas devido à limitação de acesso à internet, sendo este o meio com maior custo-benefício para se difundir informações, mas nós não conseguimos alcançar a maioria das áreas rurais dos municípios brasileiros. No início da pandemia de Covid-19 no Brasil, por exemplo, nós tentamos chegar aos territórios, nós que eu digo a CONAC, que é o Movimento Quilombola Nacional, tentamos chegar aos territórios com informações de como se prevenir do contágio do coronavírus e também informações sobre a gravidade do que estava por vir, tendo em vista que o chefe de Estado brasileiro sempre minimizou a gravidade da Covid-19 em nosso país. A maior dificuldade, entretanto, foi superar, e ainda não conseguimos, as limitações da cobertura da internet. Muitos quilombos possuem apenas um aparelho de telefone ligado à antena rural e outros sequer têm acesso à energia elétrica. Em maio de 2020, ainda no início da pandemia, a CONAC e o Intervozes buscaram identificar quais os meios de comunicação estão mais presentes nos territórios quilombolas como estratégia para canalizar as informações. E devido ao questionário ter sido disponibilizado em formato online, conseguimos apenas 27 respostas. Recordem que antes eu disse que a CONAC estima que somos 16 milhões de brasileiros e brasileiras, mas estamos em áreas rurais. Fato que evidencia a dificuldade do acesso à internet na maioria dos territórios quilombolas e, consequentemente, limita o acesso à informação. Nós acreditamos que a internet seja um meio democrático, e ele é, mas ele não é acessível à maioria dos brasileiros, mesmo em áreas urbanas. E, para nós, do movimento quilombola, a gente precisa do acesso à internet para assegurar que o nosso povo tenha acesso aos seus direitos e conhecimento aos seus direitos, pois é no campo onde acontece a maioria das violações e da ceifação de vidas quilombolas no nosso Brasil. Porque os nossos territórios ainda não estão delimitados, e isso é a maior das violações que sofremos, pois sem a delimitação dos nossos territórios, nós ficamos vulneráveis a invasores e ao avanço de empreendimentos agrícolas no campo, que prejudica os nossos modos de vida e a nossa cultura, limitando ainda mais o nosso acesso à informação. Sem conhecimento dos nossos direitos, nós não temos condições de brigar, de lutar por eles. Discutir a internet é, em sua maioria, para nós, fica em segundo plano, porque a urgência de resistir e de existir é maior, tendo em vista que os nossos territórios estão vulneráveis. Então, o acesso à internet nem sempre é discutido com a prioridade que se demanda, porque a gente precisa brigar por direito à saúde, por direito à alimentação, por direito ao território, e isso tudo nos é negligenciado por meio do Estado brasileiro, que é o responsável por assegurar dignidade aos povos quilombolas e todos os povos, comunidades tradicionais do Brasil. Nós temos mais de 200 povos e comunidades tradicionais no Brasil, mas nem todos são reconhecidos e respeitados em seus modos de vida e existência. Muito obrigada pelo espaço.
Muito obrigada, Maria Helene. Maria Helene has really pointed out that in order to access to rights and to be able to protect lives and culture and territories, we need access to the internet. So that is where the democracy or the democratic character of the internet lies. So thank you for that, Maria Helene, and for reminding us about that. Next, we are going to have Maria Alejandra Escalante for Frida, the Young Feminist Fund. And Maria Alejandra, with all that our previous speakers have said, it could be interesting to hear from you why are digital safety and care in particular important for our movements, and how is it related to consent as well? So please, Maria Alejandra, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Valeria, and thank you everyone who has intervened before. It has been already a wonderful conversation. And yes, my name is Maria Alejandra. I am currently home in Colombia, and I work for Frida, which is a young feminist-led fund that resources other young feminist groups in different regions of the global south. And what I bring here also comes from a lot of reflection from the young feminist movements and young feminist organizing that we support and that we are part of. So I'd like to bring that here for sure. And as other speakers have said, the internet and the technologies that make the internet possible are for sure a space of possibility and a space of creation and a space of alternative that can be collectively created. And yet, as also Marielene pointed out, the internet and the technologies that make it possible are also a space of dispute and are also space of threat and harassment. And because the internet, as Alfredo, the first speaker, was pointing out, because of the internet has settled in our society in such a way that sort of dismantles the line between online and offline spaces. We're surrounded by the internet, we're surrounded by the network, by the connection, by the possibilities of having those connections, not only in here in the now, but also with other communities in other parts of the world, in other moments as well. It is essential for us to think about the internet at, yes, that space of possibility, but hold on, because there's also many things happening here that make our movements be unsafe. And a lot of the things that we work on at Frida and with the young feminist groups that we are aligned with is that understanding that the internet is also a territory, and it's also it's a territory that is consisted of that digital, let's say, intangible connections that travel through these lines, but also it's also connected through wires. It's also connected through machines that are being exploited, constructed, and that it has a tangible infrastructure as well. And I want to say this because what I'm about to say about digital security is also about what happens in the internet, but also how the internet is present in our physical lives. So when we talk about, for example, young feminists striving for safety to protect ourselves from digital harassment in internet, from digital surveillance, from the trolling that can happen in different social media platforms, for example, or from the digital attacks that independent, decentralized platforms have and are living, we're talking about real hurt, real violations of our movements. It has an impact in our bodies, it has an impact in the ways that we can make community happen, because it's an obstacle, it impedes, it violates in often in very aggressive and violent ways our capacity to organize, right? And we can definitely see what is happening, for example, in the Latin American region and also in other regions around social and environmental defenders, that many of them are suffering harassment, surveillance, silencing, and many of them are losing their lives because of the activism that they're doing and because of the visibility that they have in digital spaces, and also the vulnerability that they have in digital spaces. So when we talk about safety, we are talking about the right that we have of using that collective network and infrastructure for also the defense of our bodies and our territories from the infrastructure that, from as other speakers were saying, that infrastructure that has been led by mostly corporate interests, and that has a very extractivist, tangible, physical experience in our worlds, right? And when we talk in Frida about that need for safety, we're also talking about the need for not only individual safety, but also collective safety, understanding that we are wired together and that the communication, the transfer of information that happens between me and the other affects the collective. So we put a lot of emphasis on, yes, that all the digital tips, practices that you can install and that you can follow in your day-to-day, in your individual day-to-day, but also having in mind that perspective that we're all part of a collective, and that digital safety and security has to come for all. It's a right, and it's also a process and a practice for all. And to kind of quickly close down, digital safety is absolutely care to digital care, in the sense that by me as an individual taking all these steps as to be digitally safe, I'm also caring for the well-being of my community, and I'm also caring for the well-being of those who I organize with and the movements that I belong with. We talk a lot about, for example, what is the a practice around pausing the continuous use of internet, right? How can virtual pauses also bring us some care and sort of bring us back into that offline life? Is that possible anymore? And then lastly, I want to bring an element that we work a lot with, which is the element around ecologies and the defense of the territory and environmental defense to digital care as well. Because when we talk about digital care, we're often thinking about people and societies, but then we know that the use of these technologies has an impact on the way that in the way that it uses natural resources to be. And by also thinking about care, we're trying to think about how is it that the different use and the reduction of use of technologies can also lead us to a less carbon footprint intensive present and future. How could that happen? How could we think about digital care as planetary well-being and as ecological well-being as well, knowing that all of these servers use energy? Could we think about alternative energy to pump the infrastructure that we want? And the last piece about this question is around consent. And consent also in environmental defense has this informed, previous informed and participative consent, participatory consent. So when we think about internet infrastructures, we need to prioritize the literacy, the understanding, and the political understanding of the current state of the global technologies, in order for our movements to understand, to be informed, and to have the participation it deserves, to create these knowledges, to create these practices, to create these devices and networks. And parallel to what happens with any resource extractivist natural project, without that consent, our movements lose the ability to have access to the use, to who uses these resources, how are these resources used, how are they discarded as well. So to close, when we see young feminists acting towards digital security care, we're seeing a movement that is looking forward to a decentralized, autonomous, and funded internet infrastructure that serves the communities, and serves the most and not the few. So I'll leave it there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maria Alejandra. Yes, definitely the internet is a territory in dispute, and safety, consent, as well as care has to do with the, potentializing this collective dimension of it and what we do with the infrastructure. So thank you for that. Next, we have Daniel Komakesh from Bosco, Uganda. And Daniel, you have been involved in community networks for a long time, and it could be quite relevant to hear from how do community networks in general respond to local contexts, and also why it is important towards another internet is possible. So what is the relationship between community networks and the possibility to imagine a different internet? So Daniel, welcome, and please share your views.
Thank you so much. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Can I share my screen?
Yes.
I have a presentation and some pictures. If you, I see that the host disabled this participation and screen sharing.
I think
Probably
it's,
that function is not working now.
probably not. I think it's Tatiana who is
It's fine,
host. Okay.
but it's fine. If it's not possible, we can move forward.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Daniel Komakech. I live in Uganda, and especially the northern part of Uganda, where I am working with a community network known as Bosco Uganda. Bosco Uganda is an abbreviation that stands for Battery Operated Systems for Community Outreach, Uganda. And we have a vision, and the vision is open and peaceful rural communities ready to face the challenges and opportunities of the globalized world in the 21st century. And our mission is to provide innovative information and communication technology solutions using a web-based, collaborative web-based approaches to foster socio-economic development and peace building in rural communities in northern Uganda. Just to throw a little bit more light on how this community network started. Bosco Uganda started during the insurgency period that took place in northern Uganda. That was between the years of 1986 to 2006. And this insurgency or the civil war
Daniel,
was
sorry to
between
interrupt you, Daniel. You can share your screen now if you want to share that.
Thank you,
Please
thank you,
enable.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, and sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just do that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. I said earlier on the community network that I work for is called Bosco Uganda in short. And Bosco Uganda stands for Battery Operated Systems for Community Outreach, Uganda. And the vision we have is open and peaceful rural communities ready to face the challenges and opportunities of the globalized world in the 21st century. The mission we have is to provide innovative ICT solutions using a collaborative web-based approach to foster socio-economic development and peace building in the rural communities of northern Uganda. As a community network, I wanted to give a little bit more light on how this community network started. So this was a community network that started way back during the peak of the insurgency that happened in northern Uganda. And this insurgency was between the Lord's Resistance Army, led by Joseph Kony, and then also the current leadership of the government, Yoweri Museveni, in northern Uganda. So this war took quite some time. And then as a result of the war, people from different parts of the northern region were forced to live in military protected camps. And then in the military protected camps, others fled to the diaspora. And this also as well disrupted the routine reporting of the catechist, who would report on routine basis to the metropolitan head as the Archbishop John Baptist Odama, who lives in the center of Gulu town. So as a result of this, those who were forced in the military protected camps were left with no means of communication. Some of their relatives who fled to the diaspora, people didn't even know where their relatives or friends were. So, and the catechists, while they were doing their reporting, some of them would get killed along the way while they take their reports manually to the metropolitan head. So Bosco then came up with the idea of providing voice over internet protocol telephony that people could use to communicate Other than that, there is also internet that we brought on board to end isolation because people were living in the dark. And at one point, the northern region was known as the place with the worst humanitarian situation in the whole world. So Bosco then got an operating license from the Uganda Communication Commission to operate under the unlicensed spectrum. Um, and then we started to um, pilot the idea of this community network and working with the people. Everything is owned by the community and they are responsible. They design the administration, the management of the community network. They participate in the installation and everything else. Um, just moving forward, when this community network was coming on board, of course, we are not so much interested in working with people within the rural, because I mean people within the urban, because most of those who live within the urban are already privileged. They have a means of communication. But in the rural communities, people live in remote and isolation. They do not have any means of communication. So Bosco installed their solar powered that runs the network and the internet provided to the people. So, and then also around this, while Bosco was revolving, well, there was ideas of bringing in entrepreneurship as means of sustaining the community network as it is owned by the people. So we have one of the biggest solar panel, which is also installed to bring power to the people because we work in off-grid locations. So the solar power, one of the biggest we have is 30 kilowatts, which are installed in 2 locations. And the people around that community use that solar power to run their businesses, charge their cell phones, and do other things that is necessary for their day-to-day life. And this is a community network that we brought on board during the insurgency, but is also contributing to peace building amongst the people. And the peace building comes in form of knowledge sharing. People have returned back to their ancestral homes, but still there are lots and lots of community vices that are happening. So Bosco, as a CN, is helping the people so that they understand their roles and rights in this, sensitize them on whatever they are doing, which is not acceptable. And also, we support communities to exchange and learn from one another, and also sometimes record influential peace icons within the region, and then play them over the network so that people can watch. And even the rebels themselves, they would watch this from the bush. Some of them, due to these messages, some of them would return back home. And as we speak right now, people have peace, but even if they have the peace, they have moved back to their places. There are still other challenges that they face, and they use this community network to bring peace amongst themselves. Um, Bosco uses point-to-point internet connection, and this is only possible through iTowers. And as Bosco Uganda, we have only set up our own towers. We only have about eight towers, but we operate in an area of about 28,000 square kilometers. So we also partner with other radio stations who have built their own towers so that we can mount our internet radios on those towers, and then we relay connection. So we are sending wireless connection through 167 kilometers from the center of Gulu town, and people in those communities are using the internet to communicate. We last week had a political disruption where the government of Uganda on the 13th of January, they decided to shut down internet, and this affected people a lot in various areas where we work. And then partially, they restored the internet on Monday the 18th, but still up to date and up to now, social media is still blocked. People cannot access social media. And this was due to the fear that they had around election that took place, especially the presidential election that took place on the 14th of January. So this is one of the challenges we face as a community network. But as Bosco Uganda, we have some kind of what we look at as alternatives. We have got our internal network or the intranet that runs within our LAN, and this is running at our backbone. This is, and it provides the kind of contents we still give to the people. During the lockdown imposed by the government as a result of COVID-19, all schools are closed, and up to date, it's only candidate classes who are at school. All the other people are back home. And through our network, we are able to provide what we call Colibri as an online platform, and it provides curriculum for those in schools. And this is what we have our communities, they can access this on our land. And then also, in addition to that, we have the Void Fund, which is one of the idea or the original idea of around inception of Bosco Uganda. So we have this void through which communities can call, even minus internet. They can call and then speak to one another using the void phones. But to create a bigger solution, we see that it's good for community networks to work together and then build, for example, if it were possible, we could have a separate internet exchange point. Thank you for the reminder. Just summarizing, if community networks could have their own exchange point for internet, other than that controlled by the government, because we have seen the challenges where the government would always come and close this network. So it would be good to for community networks to work together. Bringing it down to the context, as I summarize, as Bosco Uganda, we have always worked through the local leadership in all the areas where we work with our community members. We intervene or we get into the community through their leadership. They recommend to us who they think we can partner with to bring development in their areas. Other than that, we have also customized our training manuals to the local languages. And this fits very well because not everybody, due to the civil war, not everybody was privileged to attain formal education. And so we have customized the ICT training and education, entrepreneurship, everything into the local language. Few seconds while I summarize. We also engage the communities in almost every bit of our intervention. Once we identify a group, we engage them right in from the onset, from the go. So we engage them, they even participate in the installation, in the maintenance of the network, in providing security for the network. This is done by the community because Bosco as a CN is thin in terms of staff, but we are big in the community. So the communities are tasked to provide security and the training as well. We cannot train everybody, so we train a few to create the multiplier effect. And then finally, Bosco Uganda targets the most needy people in northern Uganda. Because as I said earlier, some members of the people, especially those who live within the urban, they are quite privileged and they have services provided by the government. But how about deep in the village there? People do not have access, and yet at the end of it all, they sit the same final examination set by the national body of the government. So this is what Bosco Uganda is doing as a community network. And we are the only CN in Uganda. And yeah, so thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
No, thank you. On the contrary, thank you so much, Daniel. I think what you have shared with us really describe how rooted community network initiatives are in communities and the needs and how important they are, particularly in times of crisis. So thank you for illustrating that for us. That is definitely part of how we build a different internet. So thank you for that. Next, we have my colleague Cosa from APC. Maria Alejandra was telling us, and some other speakers as well, of how important it is to go beyond this discussion about just adopting the use of a specific technology or tools. It goes beyond that. So Cosa will tell us a little bit about how we actually make this shift and how do we shift away from this corporate control internet infrastructure, including like the use of this platform that we are currently using, Zoom. So Cosa, please tell us what is needed in terms of moving away from the corporate control internet infrastructure.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, hearing you well.
Thanks, awesome. First off, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. I hope you're having a good time. Thanks everyone who's making this possible, and thank everyone who has already shared their minds about like what they're doing. It's really great to hear people uh, that's working, which we can feel connected to during these like very complicated and maybe lonely times. As Valeria said, I'm part of APC. I'm part of the APC tech team, and we provide tech support, and we try to provide reliable and stable infrastructure while also trying to untangle all the mysteries and the that the work day-to-day work brings, like all those weird things that can happen. That it's not like mainstream, it's not fancy, but it's just like things that happen every day. Um, uh, I bet many, if not all of you know that APC is starting its fourth decade of struggle of work, doing tech work, and struggle with communities all around the globe. Let's see what it brings. And we do it trying to follow and promote the feminist internet principle, which are available at feministinternet.org. I encourage you to visit that. Yeah, so I think we're facing a really odd situation. Maybe I'm not maybe, but the first time in human history that we're like facing this pandemic along with being able to communicate remotely. And this represents really interesting and a complex situation. On one hand, we're in desperate need of care and love and company, and on the other, we are completely not being able to be physically with others, and that's just weird because uh, it's like yeah, we need love, we need to talk, we need care for each other, but at the same time it's we can't we barely can go out home. So and many of the options we have that are presented to us are just commercial slash corporation services that represent a big risk for our privacy and our like intimacy, uh, and and yeah, how to try to live through that, to like surf that wave is being hard. uh, I beg your pardon if this is a really bad metaphor, but it feels like being hungry, being vegan, being in the desert, and being presented with a juicy beef steak. Like, it's how do we uh, keep our thinking, our principles, our mind, but in a very complex and hard situation. Maybe it's because of my location that I can prevent me from me thinking about food, but it feels like Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and then all of those platforms are just like fat food. We know that they're not good for healthy, but they provide instant satisfaction, instant joy, instant uh, like smiles, and how to like not use them, not use them, and also try to just be happy. That's something that concerns us. Um, and how do we like try to prevent us from like dying in starvation while we grow plants and we like, yeah, if it's a desert and there's like not a lot of things to eat, how do we find time to grow things and grow trees that will provide us shelter and fruits while we don't die alone? uh, it feels like that. How are we using this kind of platforms like Zoom, which has a history of um, censoring like talks about Palestine, for instance? And so how do we balance? How do we say, yeah, let's not use uh, commercial and corporation media, and and but at the same time, what do we use to keep communicated and try to like strengthen our struggles and our um, yeah, our attempts to build a better world, while the world doesn't like change us too much. There's many like alternatives, like instead of Zoom we can use Button or Jitsi. Instead of WhatsApp we can use, I mean, WhatsApp, it's built on top of a protocol called XMPP, and that's just free software, free and open source, an open source software. uh, but we're using WhatsApp just because it's easier, because it presents like it's a one click or an instant, uh, something that's just working, and it again presents a lot of complexity, uh, and it acts against our principles. Um, and the question is, how do we do that? How do we like try to keep smiling and try to like care for each other while also not using those corporation tools? How do we build um, like capacity, tech capacity for our organizations and our circles, while also try to share the best of us? Um, yeah, I think that's what I can. Uh, I know we're short on time, so that's me trying to summarize. I mean, my
Thank,
questions. How do we get closer to that? Thanks.
that's great, Cosa. Definitely, I think sharing what alternatives are and how they are responding to our different needs is one way to move away from that corporate control internet. So thanks for that. And that reminds me that there are several mechanisms in which we can keep in touch and keep building in this collective and the collective intelligence towards building a different internet. Last but not least, we have Hilde Stephenson from the University of Westminster. Hilde is going to share with us how can the World Social Forum support movement-based communication networks at multiple scales. So Hilde, please, with you, we are closing this part of the session before we try to hopefully have some time for discussing and taking some questions. But now the floor is yours for telling us what we can do in that regard.
Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you to everybody who's been organising this really fantastic panel. It's been really wonderful to listen to everybody's contributions so far. I'm going to try to be brief so we have some space for discussion. So just to very briefly say a bit about myself. I am a sociologist and I do research on social movements and media, and specifically I've been doing research on media and communication activism in relation to the World Social Forum since around 2009. So I've been following this process on and off for quite some time. I'm not an expert in technology. My interest is more in how people use technology and the role that technology plays in social relationships. So I want to echo what many other people have said already, that it's not just about the tools and the technologies, it's about the people and the social relationships that we build through technology. And so when we talk about communication infrastructures, then in my view, we're talking not just about wires and computers and the material infrastructure, but we are talking about the people who use those technologies as well. So I've been asked then to address this question of how the World Social Forum can support movement-based communication networks. And I think that's really a broader question about how the World Social Forum can support processes of movement building, because I think social movements are at their heart communication processes. So without communication, there are no social movements. And this is something that I'm sure you all know already, but I think it's worth repeating. I will offer some reflections, not by any means a definitive answer to this question of what the World Social Forum can do. But to start, I think it's useful to go back to the beginning of the World Social Forum, really, and think a little bit about the history of the forum and of media activism within the forum. So 20 years ago, when the World Social Forum started, it brought technological novelty. So for example, through the Ciranda platform that was set up in 2001, that was a new platform for alternative media to share content. And this was something very new. This was before social media. And there have been other platforms as well set up and supported by the forum, like World Social Forum TV. But also, and perhaps more importantly, the World Social Forum has been really fundamental in bringing together media activists from around the world. This panel being an example of that. And so it has enabled activists to share experience, to share knowledge, to share skills, and to bring, to engage in political debate about communication and really to sort of develop shared visions and develop political consciousness around communication. And I think this work to connect communication and media activists is really crucial to building movement networks more generally, because media activists, I think, really very often act as nodes that connect different movements and different communities in different contexts. Now, of course, 20 years later, the technologies that were pioneered by movements, I'm thinking about also things like indie media, of course, these technologies have been, they've been taken over by corporate giants, corporate social media platforms, and they've also become mundane. Everybody's using them now. They're part of our everyday lives, at least for the privileged people in the world who do have access to technologies. And I think this question of access is really important. But for many people in many parts of the world, they've become mundane. And of course, the challenges that come with this corporate takeover of the internet are well known. There are issues around privacy, security, surveillance, also the way that the algorithms of these platforms suppress movement content and the ideas of movements. So how then, in this context, can the World Social Forum support movement-based networks? I think that it's a battle that can't be won at the level of technology on its own. Technology is really important, and I think it's, the work that's been done around the world and the examples we've heard about today of where people are working in communities to set up alternative infrastructures is absolutely crucial and really, really important. But what I also want to say here is that it's important to also act, I think, at the level of pedagogy, really, and pedagogy and politics of communication. And what I mean by that is that I think it's important to continue engaging in political debates about communication, to build critical awareness and understanding among activists and movements of the risks of using corporate social media platforms, for example. Also, as has already been said, engaging in capacity building among communities and grassroots activist groups in the use of alternative technologies as well. But then it's also about developing a different vision of what communication is and should be. And so, and to then develop, to challenge this mainstream corporate vision of communication, which is very individualistic, which is very high speed and ephemeral, which is more about attention and visibility than it is about creating knowledge about community cooperation and so on. So I think really an important task there is about supporting the development of this kind of alternative vision of what communication is and should be. I'll finish in a minute. So in terms of how the World Social Forum can support this, then I think communication needs to be much more a priority for the forum and for the International Council of the Forum. And this is not something new, but it's something that communication activists have been arguing for a long time. The provision of tools and platforms and spaces is really important. But I think, as we know, the provision of just a space on its own is not enough. People need to be supported to access that space and to use that space. And we've heard already about the very real challenges that many communities face who don't have access to the internet and communication technologies. And so there needs to be intentional effort and investment of resources in supporting otherwise marginalized communities to participate in those spaces. And that means working not just at the sort of scale of the global and prioritizing the creation of global networks, but it also means prioritizing working with local communities in the places where the World Social Forum is held, when it is held in a physical location, to engage those communities, to build capacity and to involve them in the process. And then finally, I think the World Social Forum also, at the same time as it acts or to support these more in maybe internal processes of movement building, also needs to adopt a maybe what I will call a pragmatic approach to engaging with the mainstream or the general public through a sort of pragmatic and critically aware engagement with corporate social media platforms. I think is important as you know, all the while we are critical of these spaces, to also recognize that we need to be in those spaces and participate in them. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilde. Definitely, I mean, counteracting and disputing the internet territory has to do definitely with strengthening ourselves as a movement. So thank you for reminding us about the importance of seeing ourselves as a movement and working now in strengthening our dynamics. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask everyone if you could mind to just be with us 10 more minutes while we try to respond to some of the questions. If you have questions for the speakers, you can use the chat functionality. Here we will obviously pass the questions to the speakers, and then we want to close with some closing remarks from my colleague Mike Jensen. But let me first see if any of you would like to raise any question or to make a comment in relation to what we have heard. And thank you for all the interventions, to all the speakers, quite enlightening. So here we have, I think, a question, and Shona can also help me perhaps to see. The one that I have is, how can direct democracy or e-democracy or liquid democracy contribute to successfully develop and implement people's technology for social change and sustainable development? This is coming from Gibson. Gibson, is your question oriented to a specific speaker, or whoever wants to take it? And Emilia, you also want to say something? Yeah, you can write in the chat or you can also take the mic, I guess. Let me take your question as well. So we have the speakers to respond to the question from Gibson and then yours. So Emilia, go ahead. Okay, perfect. Go ahead, please, Emilia, if you want to take Gibson's answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeria. My name is Diogo. I'm on my wife's computer, and I'm working on reforestation here in rural Minas Gerais, Brazil. And I see the opportunity of the examples of people like Daniel in Uganda, and we are now watching the development of internet and collaboration, and that we could, you know, to make it short, let's take the example of Daniel's project and say, like, we could help them to plant a forest, a food forest. In Brazil, we work regenerative agriculture, producing food, producing wood for quality furniture, for, you know, nuts production and long-term production. So it's a long-term process. It's not ephemeral or liquid. We can collaborate in a seasonal frequency. We don't need to be instant messaging. You know, if Daniel, and with the aid of the community, of the global community, create a project for a food forest in his local community, and we budget that, and we crowdfund, and let's say among long-term wood and short-term crops, we produce, for example, cocoa or coffee, and you as a helper, as a funder, a supporter, once a year, you can receive a bit of coffee in your house. You know, it's not a delivery of every week. It's a seasonal thing. It's a periodic thing. It's a lot easier logistics. And with technology now, there's traceability. We can see the evolution of his food forest from satellite pictures. We can have blockchain doing it. And he has a great infrastructure built on mesh networks. But if there's no mesh network, we can use another protocol. We can use Scuttlebutt. We can use Manyverse, Bluetooth. So, you know, it's a matter of getting technology experts understanding the succession of reforestation. You know, it's not getting the hands dirty in a specific sense, but it's being a co-producer. Because right now, development in rural areas is something like selling projects to a market end project, where people don't care how it was produced and what comes with it. So selling end product is something that we need to disrupt. We need to pay the community for the labor of regenerating and not for the end product, you see, which will be battling in a market. We get our chocolate, we get our whatever, coffee. We can also help with building, as a global community, building agro industries. So they can produce, you know, from wine, beer, whatever. And once a year or seasonally, you know what you're going to get from the beginning. You see, it's all planned, it's all scheduled. So this is a new proposal. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm trying to read this with a group of people, some worldwide. I will share a link of the network where I've been posting this, and locally also with rural communities here, we are doing this. So it's an example of how sustainability can be attached to technology, you know, but we need to disrupt the buying food. Buying food is no good. it's a reward. Food needs to be a reward from a sport, not a commodity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think.
No, thank you so much. Please do share the information. I think it's a quite interesting initiative, and there's a lot we can learn from the ecologist movements and also from the struggle around food and natural resources. So thank you for that, and looking forward to hear more about it. There is another question. I think that's the last one that we are going to take before we hear from Mike about just summarizing the main points of the discussion and also reflecting on the next steps. But before that, there is a question here in relation to how to make accessible the free technologies for building community networks in indigenous communities. Libre Router is mentioned here as an alternative, but also what the legislation that is enabling community networks and what the role of that legislation is. So if any of you members of the panel or anyone else want to make a comment in relation to these questions posed by Tamara. And a very brief 30 seconds, 1 minute response perhaps before we close the session with the summary and reflection of next steps. Dinesh, we can take your question and then see if anyone from the panel want to intervene. But you have a question for Hilde. Dinesh.
Shall I? Shall I ask?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was at the 2004 World Social Forum in Mumbai, and one of the most impressive things was a local movement across the street from this large World Social Forum. It was called the Mumbai Resistance. They had an amazing storytelling format and it went on and on, day and night. And all the locals who couldn't understand English to everything else were crowding that space, right? Now, how can you imagine that kind of a thing in a format like where we are going, what's going on? I would have liked to see across the street from this forum another loud something that's going on, if you know what I mean, Hilda.
Sure. Yeah. I thank you for raising that. I wasn't at the Mumbai Forum, unfortunately, but and I think this raises a really important question about what do we mean by communication? And I think what we mean by communication is not just using digital technologies. It's about all sorts of human communication that includes dance, music, storytelling, and all of that. So I think this is something that is a real challenge, is kind of how to operate with this broader vision of communication and thinking about how we can connect digital means of communication to other forms of communication. It also raises the question of what is, do we prioritize the kinds of forms of communication that we are engaging in here now, which is a very rational, deliberative type of communication, or do we prioritize more passionate, effective forms of communication that involve music, dance, and storytelling? And I think that's an important question because it intersects with questions around power and privilege and so on as well. So yeah, I'm not sure that answers your questions, but those are some reflections from me on that issue.
Thank you for that. Thanks for all the questions. I think because we are running out of time, we are going to give the mic to my colleague Mike for, as I was saying, just highlighting some of the main points that our speakers have shared, and also perhaps pointing out some of the main next steps that we have heard speakers have suggested. So Mike, please, if you can share the summary of the discussion with us.
Thanks, Valeria. it's quite a responsibility to try and summarize such a rich and diverse set of interventions in the time available. So I think I'm going to just touch on a few points and some reflections and look to where we might go. I think one of the things that came out very clearly to me is, yes, the internet is a disputed territory. I really like that, Maria Alejandra. But the disputes are in such a variety, and people have so many different priorities in terms of what they would like the internet to be and to do. And I think we have to come to grips with these diverse needs, as it were. I think what was highlighted is the range of requirements from places that are completely unconnected, who in many cases in places where people simply want an affordable means of communicating with their friends and family in the nearest big city or some other part of the world in many cases. And do those people really care whether their conversations are monitored or whether their metadata is being stored somewhere? And we can see the way the commercial organizations are exploiting this great need for basic communications by ensuring that people sign up their give away their personal data to get access to, say, a public hotspot or something like that. And how do we get to grips with those to meet those people's needs in a better way, and at the same time to address the needs of human rights defenders and environmental protectors who have a great need for communications that cannot be monitored or cannot be attributed to those individuals in areas where there are oppressive regimes. We've been looking at this in APC a little bit in many ways in terms of providing alternatives to the commercial internet for our members and our partners, or at least providing insights and awareness of the alternatives and possibilities in this area. And also actually putting some funds into developing some of the tools. So for example, what we're seeing is quite promising is the use of HF radio, which can transmit over thousands of kilometers. Through one of our members, Rhizomatic, has been developing a means of using this in the Amazon to transmit, say, examples of mineral extraction or clear foresting, for example, or other environmental damage that needs the transmission of images even. This can be done over HF radio now into areas where there is no connectivity at all. At the same time, these solutions are not cheap and are not necessarily something that every community can afford or adopt. There's the human capacity area as well to consider. But at the same time, I think we can see new avenues for this kind of connectivity to really address some of the communication issues. But at the same time, I think it's important, as Marie-Hélène from CONAC mentioned, that we need to look at community media and other means of communications and not just focus on the interactive internet. And then the other point that came across is that in many respects, building this community infrastructure in remote and rural areas requires a completely different skill set to the issues being faced by activists in developed countries, where they're simply looking to shift their communication platforms off the corporate servers. So they may need solar power, for example, and to address many other basic issues around digital literacy training, supporting job creation, and very simple and basic needs for communication tools. So, are we building kind of going towards a Tower of Babel situation where we are moving some people off the commercial platforms and they're talking to each other purely on their own platforms? Or are we going to try and push the internet and the platforms into a more equitable space? I think that's one of the big questions for me that I'll leave you with in terms of the time available now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Definitely a quite substantive, significant question that we all have to respond collectively, I guess. through political engagement, through practical engagement, through what that we do at community level and global level and different levels actually. So thank you for that. And with that, I think we are going to close the session just by reminding everyone about um, the existence of some mechanisms for keeping the conversation and the engagement. One is to connect with the World Free Media Forum, but also you can subscribe to APC News. Some of the discussion about issues that Mike was summarizing are there. So you are all invited to also subscribe to our newsletter. And thank you so much to all the organizers and the speakers and the translation. That's definitely a key aspect of communication, and you have really helped us to be able to have this conversation today. So also let me just remind you about the panel happening at 14 UTC, actually in 5 minutes, about contemporary pressures on the collective imagination and resistance. So that's happening next. You are all welcome if you want to keep with us. So thank you everyone, and have a very good day.
Thank you. Take
Thanks so
care.
much,
Bye-bye.
Thank
Valeria.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.